Let's get started. Story number 1.
The ship was called the Arden Star, a mid-sized research vessel that had been retrofitted for a month-long oceanic survey commissioned by a private Norwegian exploration firm. I wasn't a scientist. I wasn't even a core crew member. I was contracted as an auxiliary ROV operator and dive systems tech, a quiet job I'd taken for the pay and the promise of being at sea, far away from land, people, and complications. I didn't ask questions. I followed orders, ran checks, and kept to my corner. We departed from Tromsø on the 3rd of August, 2017. On board were 15 of us, 6 researchers, 5 crew, 2 other techs like me, the captain, and a cook. The plan was to explore a stretch of seabed a few hundred kilometers west of Svalbard, where satellite scans had suggested a steep, unexplored drop-off. Something about it didn't sit right with me from the beginning. I'd seen sonar prints before. This one looked wrong. The trench wasn't gradual, it was sudden and narrow, like a crack, and it ran in a perfectly straight line, almost geometrically. That's not how the seafloor works. But I kept it to myself. For the first week, things were mostly routine. We ran surface scans, deployed drones, and collected water samples. The crew was solid. The scientists were quiet but polite. Dr. Kaisa Nygaard led the research team. She was sharp, didn't waste words, and seemed far more interested in the trench's exact dimensions than in any biological or geological study. Then we reached it, the fissure. It looked like the sea had been sliced with a razor. It wasn't just narrow and deep, it was black. Our multi-beam sonar couldn't map the bottom. It kept failing past a certain depth, sending back static or weird spikes of data that didn't line up with any known topography. One of the researchers, I think his name was Oystein, joked that it looked more like a vent to hell than a trench. No one laughed. On the 3rd day, anchored above the fissure, we launched the ROV. It was a brand new unit, top tier, rigged with dual arms, multiple lights, and high-definition feed capabilities. I was on the deck, guiding the tether while my colleague Mari handled the onboard diagnostics. We watched the feed in the control room. The descent was smooth at first. The lights cut through the water in tight, white beams. It was just the usual murk, silty clouds, the occasional eel, maybe a jellyfish drifting by. Then things started changing. At around 3,200 meters, the feed began picking up distortions. Not just compression glitches, but strange flickering across the screen, almost like the camera was filming through heat haze. The audio feed crackled with deep vibrations, faint at first but rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. Mari checked the signal integrity, found nothing wrong. The vibrations weren't system noise, they were coming through the water. Dr. Nygaard leaned in, listening. Can we triangulate that frequency? We tried. The vibration didn't register on the acoustic sensors, but we all felt it, like it was in our bones. The ROV descended farther, the trench opened wider the deeper we went, but there were no side walls. It wasn't a canyon, it was a shaft, perfectly vertical, no shelves, no sediment clouds. It didn't look eroded, it looked constructed. Then we saw the symbols. They appeared on the side walls, marks carved into the stone, barely visible even under full lights. The ROV hovered closer. Lines, spirals, angular shapes in repeating sequences. Too deliberate to be natural, but eroded. Very old. One of the scientists, a linguist named Halvard, said they reminded him of pre-Viking Nordic runes, but distorted, overcomplicated. He took photos from the screen. Suddenly the lights on the ROV cut out. The feed died, total black. I immediately tried to bring it back up, pinged it, checked the line. No response. Tether was intact, but it felt heavy, like something had gripped it. Then the ROV moved. Not upward, sideways. It drifted slowly at first, then jerked to the left, hard. I thought the cable would snap. The entire ship listed from the tension. Everyone in the control room fell silent. Mari stared at the screen, pale. It's being pulled, she whispered. Then, snap. The tether went slack. We reeled it in. The cable was frayed at the break, like it had been chewed. The outer sheath was scored with deep grooves. We never found the ROV. That night, the sea went flat. No wind, no waves, just stillness, like we were floating in oil. I stood on deck, watching the water. No sound, no birds, no movement. Just black sea in every direction. Then I noticed the cold. Not air cold, bone cold, like something inside me was freezing slowly, without touch. The next day, Dr. Halvard went missing. His bunk was empty. His coat and boots were still inside. His notebook, too. The logbook showed no entries after 2:41 a.m. That was the last anyone saw him. We searched the ship from bow to stern. Nothing. The security camera in the hallway near his quarters showed something strange. At 2:39 a.m., the feed fuzzed, then cut for 12 seconds. When it returned, Halvard was gone. The captain wanted to turn back, but Dr. Nygaard refused. She insisted we stay. Said we were on the edge of something historic. The crew started getting anxious. I saw it in their eyes, tension, like something was pressing in on us. One of the mechanics got sick, fever, shaking, said he was dreaming of sinking, of eyes in the dark. That night, I heard something in the water. I'd gone out to check on a power relay below deck near the hull. There was a faint knocking, not machinery, not a wave, rhythmic, slow, like someone tapping from the outside. Then came the sound, soft, almost a moan, low-pitched like a foghorn underwater. It vibrated the bulkhead. I backed away, heart pounding. I wasn't the only one. Mari heard it too. So did the cook. The next morning, half the crew looked like they hadn't slept. They were pale, twitchy. Something had shifted. More than once, I thought I saw movement in the water. Not dolphins, not sharks. Shapes, large, sliding beneath the surface just out of reach of light. Sometimes I'd see pale glimmers, like bioluminescent flashes, but they pulsed in patterns, repeating ones. On the 5th day, the cook jumped overboard. We were having breakfast. He stood up mid-sentence, walked outside, and leapt off the port side before anyone could react. No splash, just gone. We launched rescue protocols, but the sea was empty. He left no note, no signs of struggle. His hands had been shaking that morning. He told me his dreams were of a stairway made of bones, leading down into a great dark cathedral under the water. The captain tried again to force a return, but the engines failed. No warning. Just dead. Backup generators sputtered for an hour, then stopped. We were adrift. Dr. Nygaard locked herself in the lab. No one saw her for nearly 24 hours. We heard her whispering to herself, sometimes in English, sometimes in Norwegian, sometimes in a language none of us recognized. She emerged the next night, skin pale, eyes wide. She handed me a page filled with symbols. "They're speaking," she said calmly. "It's not madness, it's a memory. They've been waiting." That was the last time I saw her alive. She was found in the hydroponic bay the next morning, face down in the fish tank. Her lungs were filled with salt water. No one knew how she'd gotten there. 3 dead, 1 vanished. I found Mari below deck later that night. She was crying, shaking. She told me the lights in her room were flickering, that she saw a figure standing in the hallway, a tall, thin man with a lantern for a head. It glowed dimly like it was underwater. She wasn't the type to lie, and she wasn't the only one. Others started seeing things too. Wet footprints appearing in corridors, whispering in the showers, doors creaking open and closing with no wind. I barricaded myself in the equipment bay. But it didn't help. The dreams came stronger now. I was beneath the sea, sinking endlessly. Hands reaching up from the trench, not to grab me, but to welcome me, like they'd been waiting for me to return. I'd wake soaked in sweat, heart racing. And the ship, it was dying. Metal creaked constantly, even without motion. The lights dimmed every night at the same hour, 2:41 a.m., always that time. Then, one night, I woke to find water on the floor. Not a leak, a puddle inches deep, standing still. I looked up. The ceiling was dry. The water wasn't from above. It was coming up through the seams of the ship, seawater that smelled like rot. The final morning, there were only 5 of us left. The others, missing. Not even bodies. Just gone. Clothes left on beds. Meals half-eaten. We didn't speak. We didn't pack. We stood on deck watching the water, waiting. Then we saw it, far off in the distance, something enormous rising from the sea. A mound? No. An eye. A single lidless eye the size of a sail blinking upward through the surface. And beyond it, silhouettes, pillars, spires, structures too massive to comprehend. A city, drowned. One by one, the others walked off the edge of the boat. I didn't stop them. I couldn't. I just sat there, watching. When the rescue vessel found me 2 days later, the Arden Star was still afloat, though dead in the water. I was the only survivor, no signs of struggle, no bodies. The official report blamed hypothermia, isolation, mass hysteria, maybe gas exposure. But I know the truth. The trench was not a natural formation, it was a gate, and we opened it. Sometimes I still feel the vibrations in my skull, low, rhythmic, calling. They don't speak in words, they speak in dreams, they remember who answered. Story the end.
Story number 2.
It was supposed to be routine. just another deep-sea exploration mission in a region we'd been over 1,000 times before. The deep Atlantic off the coast of the Azores was a place where a lot of researchers ventured, mapping the ocean floor and capturing data on its strange, shadowy inhabitants. I'd done this job for years, hundreds of hours in submersibles, hours of research, and thousands of meters beneath the waves. Nothing ever happened, or so I thought. It began with an anomaly in the sonar data we had been getting for a few days. A deep dip in the terrain near the seabed, followed by a strange, high-frequency echo. It was something we hadn't seen before. A faint signal, like a whisper in the water. The rest of the team was ready to chalk it up as a minor glitch, maybe interference from a deep-sea current or the shifting of the tectonic plates nearby, but I wasn't so sure. The Nautica Horizon, the ship I worked on, was a research vessel with all the latest tech and some of the best equipment in the field. Our submersible, the Abyssal Explorer, was one of the most advanced we had, built to withstand depths of up to 10,000 meters, and with a robust ROV, remotely operated vehicle, on standby for smaller tasks. The sonar tech was state-of-the-art, so I couldn't ignore the pattern. It seemed deliberate, like a response. "We should check it out," I suggested, my voice tinged with an odd excitement I couldn't explain. The team, 3 biologists, a technician, and our lead engineer, Dr. Simon Baird, agreed. We'd been tasked with gathering information on marine life in the region, specifically monitoring some of the deeper vent fields. A new oceanic map was being created, and our data was supposed to assist in it. We weren't supposed to dig too deep into anything abnormal, but this was something different, something that caught my attention. We prepared for the descent the next day. Our plan was simple: deploy the ROV first, get a clearer picture of the anomaly, and determine if it was worth a manned mission. But as the ROV descended into the deep, I felt a cold shiver run through me. The deeper it went, the more erratic the sonar readings became, the further they diverged from what should have been a smooth drop. "Look at this," I muttered under my breath. The ROV's camera feed flickered, briefly showing static before a faint image appeared. It was brief, almost unnoticeable, but I saw it clearly. A massive shadow, drifting just beyond the field of vision. A shape too large and too symmetrical to be a whale, yet too fluid to be anything mechanical. "Did you see that?" I asked, but when I glanced at the screen, the shadow was gone. "Run the scan again, please." The team was starting to take notice now. There was something in the water. Something that didn't belong. A deep, unnatural movement. The techs tried to stabilize the feed, but the image seemed to blur each time we focused on it. The shadow was elusive, but the more I watched the screen, the more certain I became. It was not a trick of the camera or interference. It was there, something alive and moving against the currents. The ROV was acting like it was being drawn toward it despite our attempts to control it. Dr. Baird, who had been monitoring the equipment closely, looked up at me with an expression of unease. "I don't like this," he said. "We're venturing off course. This isn't something we've seen before." I agreed, but curiosity won out. We couldn't stop now, not after everything we had done to get this far. The shadow wasn't just a curiosity. It felt like a presence in the water. One that was watching us. We decided to send the Abyssal Explorer down. The pressure at these depths would make the submersible a risky move, but we had no choice. The captain gave us the go-ahead, and within hours, we were ready for the dive. The descent was slow. The further we went, the more the ocean darkened. We passed through layers of brine, the water growing colder and colder. Eventually, even the submersible's floodlights couldn't pierce the deep, and the outside world was swallowed by complete blackness. When we reached the bottom, it felt as though we had fallen off the edge of the world. The sonar readings were off the charts, distorted and chaotic, like we had crossed into a pocket of the ocean that didn't follow the natural laws. I had a sense of dread creeping up my spine, something I couldn't shake. We didn't know it yet, but we were about to make our biggest mistake. The first clue came when we deployed the ROV. As it reached the seabed, the lights flickered, and the faint whisper of a hum echoed through the submersible's speakers. It wasn't from our equipment. It was something else, something in the water. The ROV was already drifting off course. We tried to regain control, but it was like the currents had a mind of their own. That's when we saw it, The dark shape from earlier, but now it was clearer, closer. And there were others, too many to count. Moving like phantoms through the water, twisting and coiling around each other, their forms indistinguishable from the blackness. They were huge, their outlines barely visible against the vast, dark expanse. Some of them had long, trailing limbs, like vines or tentacles. "What the hell are those?" I whispered, staring at the screen. The rest of the team remained silent, too stunned to speak. Then the hum became louder, more distinct. The sound grew in intensity until it was impossible to ignore. It wasn't a mechanical hum. It was something organic, a deep, pulsing rhythm that vibrated through the hull of the sub. "Get us out of here!" Dr. Baird shouted. But it was too late. The ROV's feed to black, and we felt the sub's controls become unresponsive. It was like being trapped in a vacuum, surrounded by an impenetrable mass. The water outside seemed alive, like it was pressing against the sub, making it impossible to move. "Check the sonar," I ordered. The technician scrambled to bring up the readings. The sonar was unreadable. The blips on the screen were erratic, scattered in all directions. It didn't make sense. Whatever was down here, it was affecting everything. The lights, the communications, the navigation. We were in uncharted waters, and there was no way out. And then we saw it. A shape, huge and dark, slowly rising from the abyss, blocking our view of everything else. It came closer, filling the entire viewport. It wasn't just a creature. It was a presence, something that had no place in the natural world. Its skin was smooth, dark, almost oily, and its size defied logic. It was like looking at a black hole, pulling everything into its gravity. I felt a sudden pressure in my chest, as if the very air was being sucked out of the sub. The hum grew louder, and a new sound emerged, something more disturbing. It was a voice, but it wasn't human. It was more like a chorus of whispers, faint but insistent, filling the sub with an overwhelming sense of dread. I couldn't understand what it was saying, but I knew it knew we were here. The lights blinked off, and in the darkness I heard the scraping, a slow, deliberate sound, as if something was dragging its body along the hull, reaching out to us. The last thing I remember before the power went out completely was a brief flash of something. Two glowing eyes like the light from deep within the ocean staring at me through the viewport. Then silence. When we finally surfaced, we were miles from our original location. The crew was disoriented, most of them in shock, but no one spoke of what had happened. No one even acknowledged it. The footage from the ROV had been corrupted, destroyed beyond repair. The recordings of the voices, the hum, everything. Gone. It's been weeks now, and I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. That same hum haunts my dreams. I've heard it at night, soft at first, but always getting louder. Sometimes I wake up in the dark, and it's almost as if the water is pressing against my skin, the sound of those whispers ringing in my ears. I'm not sure what we found down there. Some kind of ancient being, something that predates everything we know, or maybe it's just something we weren't meant to understand. I don't know if I'll ever go back, but if I do, I don't think I'll be alone. Story the end.
Story number 3.
I've spent most of my life working in the deep sea, first as a commercial diver, then as a salvage expert. I've seen things down there that no one could imagine, things that would make any normal person turn around and run for the surface. But nothing compares to what I encountered during my last job in the Bering Sea. It started like any other job. The company I worked for, Nereus Marine Services, had been contracted by a private company to investigate the wreck of a ship lost in the early 20th century. They had no idea what caused it to sink, just that it went down in a storm. The wreck had been sitting on the ocean floor for nearly 100 years, and no one had dared to dive to its depths until recently. The wreck was about 250 meters deep, which was well within the range of the ROVs, remotely operated vehicles, we used. Our task was simple: locate the wreck, document it, and retrieve any historical data we could. The team, myself included, was assembled and sent out to a research vessel called the Echo Titan. The first day we arrived, everything seemed normal. The sea was rough, as it usually is in that area, but the conditions were manageable. I was assigned to help operate the ROV and monitor the diving equipment. My colleague Ben was responsible for the navigation system. Everything was set up for a straightforward dive. We had been given a vague location, but we had the general area pinpointed. We sent the ROV down, and as it descended into the inky blackness of the sea, I felt a familiar thrill. This was my element, deep in the abyss, far from the world above. No one could hear you scream down here. It wasn't long before we found something. At first, it looked like a large mass, almost like a rock or a large underwater boulder. But as we zoomed in, the shape became clearer. It was the wreck of the ship, lying on its side, covered in decades of silt and debris. There was a large hole in the hull, and the metal was twisted and corroded from years of saltwater exposure. It wasn't a particularly unusual sight for me, considering the number of wrecks I had worked on. However, something about this one felt different. We spent hours documenting the wreck, taking images of the wreckage and mapping out the surrounding area. At one point, we noticed a strange feature. There was a faint glow coming from inside the wreck. It was not the typical bioluminescence you would expect to see from marine life. It wasn't blue or green like the natural glow you find from deep-sea creatures. This was an eerie, unnatural pale light, almost as if the ship itself was glowing. Ben was the first to speak up about it. "You see that? There's something wrong with that glow." I had to agree with him. It didn't make sense. Wrecks like this, especially ones that had been down for decades, didn't emit any kind of light. We moved the ROV closer, using its robotic arm to push aside some debris. As we got closer to the wreck, I noticed a hatch, one that hadn't been visible earlier. It was open, and the glow seemed to be coming from inside the ship, faint but undeniable. "Let's get closer," I said. "Maybe there's something inside that's causing it." Ben seemed hesitant, but after a moment of silence, he nodded. I guided the ROV closer, carefully maneuvering it towards the open hatch. As we approached, I felt a strange sense of unease creep up my spine. Something didn't feel right. We were about to make history, to document a shipwreck that had been untouched for nearly a century, but something about this felt wrong. We hovered near the hatch, the faint glow illuminating the darkness around us. Then the ROV's sensors picked something up, movement. It was subtle, like a small shift in the water. My heart skipped a beat. I checked the monitors, but there was no explanation. The sensors weren't registering any sort of marine life or debris that could be moving. I decided to lower the ROV further, hoping to get a better look. That's when we saw it. A figure. It wasn't human, but it was close. So close, I almost thought it was a person at first. It was floating inside the wreck, its form suspended in the water. The glow was coming from it, not the ship itself. The figure seemed to be a dark silhouette at first, but as the ROV's lights illuminated it further, I could make out its features. The figure was pale, almost translucent. Its skin was stretched tightly over its bones, and its eyes, if you could call them that, were black voids. There was no face, no expression, just a dark, empty space where a human face should have been. I could feel my breath catch in my throat. This wasn't normal. The figure didn't seem to move. It just hovered there, motionless, its limbs floating in the current. We watched it for what felt like hours, but in reality it was only a few minutes. The thing didn't react to the ROV or to the lights. It just hung there like a broken doll suspended in time. Ben was the first to break the silence. "What the hell is that?" It's not possible." I felt my body tense, my instincts screaming at me to pull the ROV back, but I couldn't. I couldn't take my eyes off of it. Then, in the blink of an eye, the figure turned. Its head tilted slowly, and I swear it looked right at us. It wasn't supposed to be possible. The creature didn't have eyes, but I could feel it looking at me, at us. I've never experienced anything like it in my life. It wasn't a feeling of dread. It was worse than that. It was a complete loss of control, like we were intruders in its domain, like we were the ones being watched. Then the ROV's camera feed started to flicker. The lights dimmed, and for a second, everything went black. We lost communication with the ROV. The connection to the surface was severed. Panic set in. Ben shouted into the mic, trying to get a signal, but there was nothing. I couldn't explain it, but I felt a pull to that ship, to that figure. The next few minutes were a blur. I don't remember how, but I found myself standing at the ROV station, staring at the empty feed. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the screen. Then I heard it. A voice. A soft whisper that seemed to come from the depths of the ocean itself. It was unintelligible at first, like a language I had never heard, but then it became clear. The whisper wasn't just in my ears, it was in my head. Help us. The words echoed in my mind, sending a cold chill down my spine. I had no idea who or what was speaking. There was no way we could have been receiving radio signals down there. It wasn't possible. I snapped out of my trance, but when I turned to look at Ben, he was gone. The chair was empty, the room silent except for the low hum of the equipment. Panic surged through me as I realized I was alone. I tried to call for him, but the words caught in my throat. I grabbed the mic, but my hands shook so violently that I couldn't get a signal. That's when I heard it again. The whisper. Help us. I felt the pull again, stronger this time. Without thinking, I ran to the diving deck. I don't remember exactly why, but I knew I needed to be in the water. Maybe I thought I could get answers. Maybe I thought I could find Ben. But as I stood on the edge of the platform, the waves crashed against the side of the ship, and I realized something. The ocean was calling me. I don't know how long I stood there, staring out into the black expanse. My mind raced, trying to process everything that had happened. But all I could hear was the whisper, the voice that had been calling us, calling me. I knew it wasn't human. It wasn't from this world. The next morning, when the crew found me standing on the deck, I had no memory of what happened. They said I looked like I had seen a ghost. Ben was never found. The ROV was recovered, but the footage was damaged beyond repair. The client pulled the plug on the project, and the Echo Titan was sent back to port. I left the ocean that day. I couldn't stay. I couldn't go back into that darkness. But sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still hear it, the whisper, the voice calling from the depths, and I know, no matter how far I run, it's still waiting for me. Story the end.
Story number 4.
It was supposed to be routine, one of those trips that came and went with little fanfare, a few data logs, and some photographs to add to our ever-growing archive of deep-sea studies. The Endurance was a state-of-the-art research vessel, and our team was small but efficient. There were 5 of us on board, each responsible for different aspects of the mission. We were based in the Pacific, working our way through the Mariana Trench region, where few had ventured before. But what we encountered there, what we uncovered, was far beyond anything any of us could have prepared for. I'm the lead marine biologist on the crew, and I've spent most of my life in the water, researching everything from coral reefs to the most isolated ecosystems of the deep sea. I know the ocean's patterns, its rhythms, but the trench, the Mariana Trench, is different. There's nothing normal about that place. We were conducting a survey of the ecosystem at 10,000 meters, focusing on a particular species of bioluminescent squid. As usual, we dropped our remotely operated vehicle, Abyssal, into the dark waters, and I watched it disappear into the depths on the monitor. The first few hours were uneventful. It's always that way at first. Just the steady, unchanging darkness, broken only by the occasional flash of some unknown creature moving beyond the ROV's lights. The crew went about their duties, analyzing data, processing information from previous dives, talking shop, but the tension on board was palpable. Something felt wrong. At first, I thought it was just the isolation getting to us, but there was a strange weight to the air, something thick and pressing that I couldn't shake. It's hard to explain, but I felt it as soon as we descended past 9,000 meters. It was like a shift, an invisible change. And that's when I first noticed it. The ROV's signal began to fluctuate. At first, I thought it was just the usual interference from the depth, but then it started happening more frequently, lasting longer. The feed would distort, and the picture would break up into grainy static. It's common at extreme depths, but it shouldn't have been happening at this level. The system was supposed to handle it. "We've got a problem," I muttered, looking up from the monitor. "What's going on?" asked Sarah, the ship's technician, glancing over my shoulder. "I don't know," I said, frowning. "Signals dropping in and out. It's not just noise, though. There's something off." Sarah immediately began running diagnostics on the ROV's equipment while I tried to steady myself. I didn't like the way the deep, inky blackness of the water seemed to loom closer, as if pressing against the hull of the ship, a strange sensation of being watched, of being stalked. "I'm going to do a quick reset," Sarah said, typing commands into the control panel. I watched as the ROV's feed flickered back to life. But then the picture went dark. A strange noise, like a distant thrum vibrating through the very water itself, echoed through the ship. I could feel it in my bones. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Hear what?" Sarah replied, her eyes still fixed on the screen. I didn't respond. My gut was churning now, and the unease had settled deep in my chest. I turned back to the monitor. The feed was back, but this time the image was different. It wasn't just static. It was something else, something moving. A shadow in the distance, a massive dark form just barely visible at the edge of the ROV's light. My heart skipped a beat. "Sarah, I think I'm seeing something down there," I said, my voice a little too sharp. "What do you mean?" she asked, finally glancing at the screen. "It's probably just one of the usual creatures, but I knew better." This wasn't right. The shadow was too large to be anything normal. The deep sea is full of creatures that can easily slip by unnoticed, but this wasn't just a flash of bioluminescence or a school of fish. "I'm going to bring Abyssal closer," I said, trying to sound calm even though my hands were shaking. I eased the ROV forward, the camera feed zooming in, and then, just for a moment, the shadow became clearer. It was the size of a building. No, larger. It looked like a massive, sinuous body, but there was something horribly wrong about it. The way it moved was unnatural, like it was both swimming and crawling at the same time. I couldn't make out details, but there was something in the way the creature's form twisted, something that made my stomach turn. I thought I saw a flash of movement from within its shadow. Multiple limbs, or maybe faces. "Sarah," I whispered. "I think we need to bring it back up." I tried to turn the ROV, but it wouldn't respond. The controls felt sluggish, almost as if something was holding it in place. A sudden jolt shot through the system, and then the lights went out entirely. The ship shuddered, and I could feel the entire vessel dip as though something massive had collided with it. I felt the panic rising in my throat. Something wasn't right. This wasn't just an equipment failure or a malfunction. There was something down there. Something alive. "Shit," Sarah shouted, slamming her hand against the control panel. "What the hell is going on?" The hum from earlier returned, louder this time. It was no longer just an interference sound. It was like the ship itself was vibrating in tune with whatever was down there in the depths, the sound growing in volume until it felt like it was pressing against my skull. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice strained. But before anyone could respond, the monitor flickered back on, and there it was again. The shadow. It was much closer now. I could see the outline of what looked like a massive bloated body, shifting in the dark, its form undulating like it was swimming through thick water. I could make out the shape of its limbs, long, gnarled appendages, each ending in spiny, claw-like fingers. There were no eyes, just wide, open mouths scattered across the surface of its body, like some grotesque, unnatural horror. And behind it, something else. Smaller, indistinct shapes, almost like faces or figures, moving within its form. I felt bile rise in my throat. I couldn't breathe. Something was wrong, so horribly wrong. "Bring it back up. Now! Now!" I shouted. But as Sarah rushed to initiate the ascent, the control system refused to respond. The entire ship began to tremble, as though something heavy was dragging itself along the ocean floor. And then the lights flickered again. This time, only the emergency lights came on, casting the room in an eerie red glow. The air in the control room grew thick, suffocating. I could barely hear anything above the sound of my own heartbeat. And then the radio crackled to life. "Endurance? Do you copy?" It was Captain Harris's voice, distorted, faint. "What the hell is happening down there? We're losing you." I couldn't respond. I was frozen. The shadow was right beneath us now, too close for comfort. And then I saw something else in the feed, something that made my blood run cold. A hand. A massive, clawed hand, rising from the depths, reaching up toward the abyssal. It was covered in a slick, black membrane, like the skin of some sea creature, but it was too large, too unnatural. As the hand came closer, I could see the jagged, broken nails, the webbed skin, and the way the hand moved, not like a creature's, but like it was. Searching. I couldn't look away. I wanted to scream, to do something, anything, but all I could do was watch as the hand closed around the ROV. It was like time stopped. The lights blinked out, and I heard nothing but the pounding of my own heart in my ears. And then, just like that, the hand pulled the ROV down. The feed cut to static. The ship groaned again as if something had pressed against it from below. And then there was silence. We waited and waited. But no signal came back. No sound. No movement. I can't explain what happened after that. We tried to send down another ROV, but it never returned. Captain Harris ordered us to return to port, and we hauled anchor as fast as we could. The entire crew was on edge, staring into the dark waters as if they knew somehow that we weren't alone. I've never returned to the trench, and I doubt I ever will. I don't think anyone will ever truly understand what we encountered down there. I don't think we were meant to. Story the end.
Story number 5.
I had been working as a commercial diver for years, but it wasn't until I took on this particular job that truly understood what it meant to be afraid of the sea. Most of my work had involved standard salvage, sunken containers, lost equipment, that sort of thing. The ocean was vast and unpredictable, but I'd grown used to it, the sense of calm that comes with knowing the depths. But nothing could have prepared me for what I encountered on that dive. It started like any other job. A call came through from the company I worked for, Deepwater Salvage. They had a new assignment for me. A wreck had been located off the coast of the Philippines, a ship that had gone down 20 years ago under mysterious circumstances. The Maris was a merchant vessel that had disappeared without a trace. No distress signal, no final messages, nothing. All the crew were declared lost at sea. There had been no survivors. The wreck had been located by a private expedition that had been mapping the seabed, and they wanted us to recover valuable cargo, a shipment of electronics that had supposedly been on board. The job seemed simple enough. I wasn't too concerned at first. Sure, it was deep, over 1,500 meters, but I had done similar dives before. I had the experience, the equipment, and the team to do it. It was a relatively calm day when we left port. Our boat, the Blue Horizon, was equipped with everything we'd need: diving gear, remotely operated vehicles, and a deep-sea submersible. The first few days were uneventful. We surveyed the wreck site using sonar and the ROVs. The ship was sitting upright on the seabed, looking like an iron tomb. The sonar scan didn't show any obvious signs of damage. It was as if the ship had just settled into place and stayed there. No scarring, no marks from an explosion or any obvious sign of trauma. Just a ship sitting there. But the readings also showed something odd, anomalies in the surrounding area, a disturbance in the water, almost like a current that wasn't supposed to be there, and it seemed to pulse in a pattern. We set up our dive plan, and I geared up for my first descent. The goal was simple: get down to the wreck, assess the area, and get a closer look at the cargo hold where the electronics were stored. I wasn't expecting anything unusual, heavy stints, but even as I began my descent, something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the ocean felt different. It was as though the water itself was heavier, more oppressive, and the deeper I went, the thicker it felt around me. There's a sort of pressure that comes with diving to extreme depths, a weight that settles on your chest. But this was something more, something unexplainable. As I neared the wreck, I could see the outline of the Maris emerging from the dark abyss, its once pristine white hull now a sickly shade of rust. The ship was completely still. Not a single movement, not even the usual sway you'd expect from water currents at that depth. Everything was eerily calm. The wreck looked like it had been abandoned, forgotten, empty, devoid of life. I entered the ship through a shattered porthole and made my way through the main corridor. The first thing that struck me was the silence. Even though I was 1,000 meters under the sea, I expected some noise, sea creatures, the sound of the hull creaking as the ocean slowly claimed it. But there was nothing. Just absolute silence, not even the faintest sound of water. I pressed on, moving deeper into the ship. The air inside the wreck was thick with the smell of decay, a stench that had been trapped in the vessel for years. The rust on the walls was like a skin, shedding in flakes, and the floor was slick with oil and debris. I had to move carefully to avoid stepping on broken glass or other dangerous objects. I moved through the corridors, hoping to find the cargo hold quickly. But the longer I moved, the more disorienting it became. The ship seemed larger than it should have been. I had expected the interior to be cramped, but it felt like the space stretched out endlessly. The walls seemed to close in on me, narrowing as I moved. Then I saw it. A flash of movement, something just out of the corner of my eye. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. There was nothing there. My heart was racing, my breath coming in quick gasps. I shook my head, telling myself it was just the pressure, the isolation. But even as I tried to calm myself, I felt an unease settle over me. Something was wrong. I continued on, finally reaching the cargo hold. The door to the room was wide open, and as I stepped inside, I immediately noticed something strange. The area was unnaturally still, as though it had been preserved in time. I moved forward, inspecting the scattered crates and containers. Some of them had long since decayed, but others looked oddly untouched by time. The electronic equipment we were supposed to retrieve was sitting near the far wall, exactly where the sonar had indicated it would be. But as I moved toward the cargo, something caught my eye. In the far corner of the room, there was a dark shape, a figure hunched over, just barely visible in the dim light. At first, I thought it was just another piece of debris, but then it shifted. The shape moved, and I froze. The figure wasn't made of rust or wreckage. It was human. I couldn't believe it. I wasn't sure if I was hallucinating from the depth or if I had somehow missed a crew member trapped in the ship. But no, that wasn't possible. The Maris had gone down 2 decades ago. The crew had been declared lost, their bodies never recovered. And yet here, in the wreck, was something that looked far too much like a person. I was about to turn and swim back when the figure stood up. Slowly, unnaturally. It was wearing a tattered uniform, the colors faded and barely recognizable. The figure's movements were jerky, like it was struggling to find its balance. Its face was obscured by shadows, but I could see its eyes, black, empty, void of any human recognition. A chill ran through me, and my heart started to race. Something was horribly wrong. I didn't wait for it to move closer. I turned and swam back to the door, but the water felt different now, thicker, heavier, as though something was pulling at me, dragging me back. I could hear it then, the faint sound of a whispering voice, not in my earpiece, but directly in my mind. It was calling my name, repeating it over and over. I couldn't make out the words, but it was enough to send my pulse through the roof. I didn't dare look back as I swam, but I could feel the presence, the weight of it following me. My flashlight flickered, and in that brief moment of darkness, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I didn't stop swimming until I was back in the open water, my oxygen tank nearly empty. I was pulled up to the surface by the crew in a panic, and when I looked back down at the wreck, I could see it. The figure, standing in one of the portholes, watching me. I don't know how I made it back to the surface. I don't know how I even managed to get out of the wreck alive. We immediately called off the operation. The Maris was left undisturbed after that. The company was furious at first, demanding to know what happened, but I couldn't explain it to them. How could I? No one would believe the things I saw down there. The figure, the whispers, the feeling that something in the wreck was alive, something that should have never been disturbed. We never went back to that wreck. In fact, I left commercial diving altogether after that. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the feeling of something lingering in the depths, something that was never meant to be found. I tried to put it all behind me, but there are nights when the water's still and the air is thick that I can still hear that voice calling my name from the depths. Story the end.
Story number 6.
In 2019, I worked as a marine biologist for a private underwater research firm contracted by a Scandinavian energy conglomerate. Our team had been hired to study environmental impacts around a proposed deep-sea drilling site in the Norwegian Sea, about 200 kilometers off the coast. This wasn't shallow reef diving science work. This was miles below the surface, far beyond sunlight, in the kind of cold, crushing dark where even bacteria evolved in ways we didn't understand. The operation was based on a converted oil platform named KT-742, nicknamed the Grendel by its crew. It floated alone out there, surrounded by infinite water and silence. I'd been stationed on it for 3 weeks. It was August, and the North Atlantic was gray and wet, almost constantly. The days blurred together. Inside the Grendel, the temperature was cold but livable. There were 21 of us on board, scientists, engineers, a few administrators, and the ship's minimal skeleton crew. My job involved overseeing data from a remotely operated vehicle, ROV, called Hydra 3. We used it to collect samples, capture images, and scan for anomalies in the seafloor. The area we were studying was unusual. The sonar had picked up strange vertical formations, perfectly spaced in a grid-like pattern, about 3,700 meters down. We didn't have any solid explanation. Some thought it could be hydrothermal vent chimneys. Others suspected some kind of ancient lava formation. The first strange thing happened on our fifth deep dive into the trench. I was in the control room with Marcus, one of our ROV operators, watching Hydra 3 descend. The cameras showed the usual, a black, empty world that didn't end until the lights hit something. When they did, we all leaned in. There were columns, tall, narrow structures rising from the seafloor, spaced with unnatural precision. They weren't rock. They looked like metal, corroded, covered in marine life, but definitely manufactured. Some had markings, engravings, symbols that didn't match any known language. I remember one clearly, a spiral shape with lines radiating outward like sunbeams, but broken midway through. We took footage. No one said anything for a while. Then our lead geologist, Dr. Halverson, muttered, "This wasn't built by accident." After that, things started to shift on board. The equipment began to malfunction in small but strange ways. Battery drains, timestamps resetting, cameras failing for no obvious reason. Marcus said the hydraulics on Hydra 3's right arm twitched when no one was touching the controls. I didn't see it myself, but I saw him go pale as he described it. He wasn't the superstitious type. 2 nights later, I woke to a loud bang. The platform's hallways were empty when I stepped out. I wandered toward the lab, heart racing, trying to make sense of the echo. As I passed the hydrography station, I saw the door was ajar. I pushed it open and found Halverson sitting at a desk, staring at a monitor showing sonar data. I asked him if he'd heard the sound. He didn't even turn around. Just said, "They're moving." I asked what he meant. "The structures," he whispered. "They're not fixed. The grid changed. I ran 2 scans back to back, and 3 of the columns shifted. I checked for tectonic activity. Nothing. They moved themselves." I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, Halverson was gone. We searched every level of the platform. No sign of him. The platform logs said he'd opened the airlock at 3:12 a.m., but the security footage showed only static for a full 6 minutes around that time. Just grainy, black and white snow. People started to lose their nerve after that. Our supervisor, Anders, locked down the dive schedule and suspended all-night work. We held a memorial service for Halverson, though nobody wanted to say the word suicide. Most of us didn't believe it. He'd been disturbed, yes, but not suicidal. It felt more like he was compelled to go outside, or called. The next incident came 3 days later. We'd sent Hydra 3 back down, this time with automated route protocols to avoid human piloting. It was only supposed to record a new scan and return. About 2 hours into the dive, its forward camera picked up movement. Something swam past. Fast, massive, just a shadow at the edge of our lighting range. It didn't match the profile of any known deep-sea creature. It moved with a sort of purposeful grace, like it was aware of us. Then the feed cut. We tried to reboot the signal, but couldn't reestablish a link. Hydra 3 went completely dark. It was equipped with emergency resurfacing protocol. We waited. 30 minutes passed, then 60. It never came back. The loss of Hydra 3 hit us hard. It wasn't just the cost, it was the idea that something had taken it. Marcus quit the next morning. He didn't even wait for transport. Took one of the emergency skiffs and headed east until a Coast Guard vessel picked him up. His final log entry read simply, "They are under us." The mood on the platform heavy after that. Several people reported hearing voices in their rooms, faint whispers, almost unintelligible. One engineer, Sophia, told me she woke up to find water pooled on her floor and strange barnacle-like growths on her boots. The maintenance team found no leak, and when we inspected the boots, the growths were gone. I don't know what I expected to find when I checked the lab footage from that night, but what I saw didn't make sense. The hallway camera outside her cabin caught someone walking past at 2:47 a.m., but not Sophia. The figure was thin, pale, and soaking wet, like it had just emerged from the ocean. It stopped briefly at her door, then disappeared. That same day, the platform's temperature control system failed. The interior dropped to 10 degrees Celsius in less than an hour. We huddled in the mess hall with blankets and backup heaters trying to stay warm. That was when we heard the tapping. It came from below. A rhythmic sound, almost like a Morse code. Bang, bang, pause, bang, bang, bang. Then silence. Then it started again. It echoed through the metal floors like someone or something was knocking from underneath. We checked the subdeck. No one was there. No damage. No explanation. That night, I dreamed of drowning. I saw the structures, taller now, glowing with soft green light. I was swimming through them, though I couldn't control my movements. I felt drawn forward toward something vast and coiled at the center. It had no eyes, no face, just movement and pressure and an overwhelming sense of hunger. I woke, gasping, choking, but my throat was dry. My sheets were damp with sweat. I wasn't alone. For a split second, I saw it. A figure crouched in the corner of my room, long arms pressed to the walls, skin like kelp and sand, eyes like dark holes. And then it was gone. By the following week, 5 more crew members had requested immediate evacuation. Our supervisor denied them. The firm needed the data. The drilling project had investors. On the 14th day, we picked up another sonar anomaly. Not a formation. Movement. Something massive, over 200 meters in length, traveling just above the trench floor. It wasn't any submarine. The heat signature was organic. We tracked it for 5 minutes before it disappeared. Not drifted away. Vanished. It simply wasn't there anymore. Like it sank through the floor. The next morning, Sophia disappeared. There were no signs of a struggle, no malfunctioning airlocks. She was just gone. Her bunk untouched, her boots still wet. One of the engineers swore he saw her walking outside the night before, without a suit, just barefoot, walking along the exterior catwalk into the fog. Nobody believed him, or maybe we all did but didn't want to admit it. We called for evacuation. No reply. A storm had knocked out our long-range comms. We were alone. That night, we gathered in the main lab. 8 of us left. We locked the doors, we turned off the lights, and we waited. Around midnight, we heard it again. Tapping. But now it wasn't below, it was on the walls, the windows, something scraping gently along the exterior glass, circling the platform like a shark. The emergency lights flickered. Then came the voice, a low whisper, layered and distant like it was coming through water. Let us in. No one moved, no one breathed. We heard the bolts of the main airlock begin to grind, unprompted. We had to manually override the system to seal it. The voice didn't come again, but the lights never came back. 2 of the remaining crew lost their minds that night. We found one trying to tear open the pressure doors with his bare hands, fingers bloody and broken. The other sat in the storage room, rocking back and forth, whispering to someone who wasn't there. By the time the weather cleared and rescue came, only 4 of us were functional. The rest were unresponsive, catatonic, or missing. The rescue team found the platform in disarray. Power systems fried, several interior sections flooded, strange growths along the metal surfaces that crumbled on contact. Our data drives were intact, but the video files of the final sonar readings were corrupted. All images of the structures were gone. I left the firm 2 months later. I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing those spirals, kept hearing that voice. My dreams were always cold, always wet, always deep. Last year, I tracked down Marcus. He was living in a small cabin in the Swedish countryside. He looked older, thinner, pale. He didn't want to talk at first, but when I mentioned the Grendel, his eyes widened. "You heard it too, didn't you?" he said. I nodded. He told me something I still can't shake. Those columns, they weren't just structures. They were doors. We opened one. I asked what he thought was down there. He didn't answer for a long time, just stared at the sky. Then finally whispered, "Something waiting." And I believe him. Story the end.
Story number 7.
My name is Alan Priest, and I used to be a commercial diver for a deep-sea recovery operation off the coast of South America. We were based out of Valparaiso, Chile, and most of our work involved sunken cargo containers, wreck inspections, or the occasional salvage for insurance companies. I'd been doing it for 9 years when we got a strange call from a shipping client in Lima. One of their large freight carriers, the Mar Azul, had gone dark 2 days before it was scheduled to dock in Guayaquil. No distress signal, no last known position. It was like it just blinked off the radar. What was even stranger was that the insurance company had received a distress ping from the ship's emergency locator beacon 36 hours after it was declared missing. That didn't make sense. These things activate when the ship sinks, but the ping came from the trench shelf nearly 400 miles southwest of where it was expected to be. That area wasn't exactly mapped out, and no shipping lanes ran through it. It was deep, unstable, and considered a graveyard for old wrecks. They offered us a premium rate to locate the wreckage and, if possible, recover the ship's black box. I signed up immediately. The crew was 5 of us, 2 divers, an ROV pilot, a ship's engineer, and the captain. We used our standard vessel, the Delfina, a 30-meter salvage ship with long-range capabilities and 2 mid-grade ROVs. Our contract specified 10 days to search and recover. That should have been plenty of time. We didn't know it then, but we were already too late. The weather was calm when we arrived in the sector. Blue skies, clear seas, almost unsettlingly perfect. We began by deploying the sonar to map the seabed. Within a day, we found something, a massive object on the ocean floor, mostly intact, partially wedged into the shelf's incline. It had no movement, no heat signatures. That was expected. We sent down an ROV for visual confirmation. I was on shift with Dana, the ROV operator. The submersible's camera cut through the black with its floodlights, showing the wreck from above like a ghost frozen in place. It was definitely the Mar Azul, and it looked like it had settled without capsizing. That alone was odd. Ships that go down fast rarely land so neatly. The hull had an unnatural gleam in some parts, almost like it had been polished, and there were strange gouges along the bow, not scraping, more like tearing. Dana zoomed in on the damage. The metal wasn't just torn, it was pulled outward, as if something inside the ship had tried to escape, or worse, something had tried to claw its way in. I radioed the others. Captain Ruiz didn't say much. He just told us to prep for a manned dive. I didn't like the sound of it, but protocol said we had to check the interior if the ROV couldn't retrieve the black box. The next morning, Dana and I suited up for a tandem dive. Our suits were deep-rated, fully enclosed, tethered to the surface by a reinforced umbilical line with audio and video feeds. The descent was uneventful until we reached the ship. The stillness was oppressive. I can't explain it properly. You expect silence in the deep, but this was more like being buried alive. We entered through a rupture in the cargo bay. The lights from our helmets pierced the darkness, revealing rows of twisted containers, some of which had burst open. Inside, we found plastic crates filled with unmarked drums. No documentation, no manifests matched this cargo. That was a red flag. Dana moved ahead while I examined one of the drums. The seal had been broken. Inside was some kind of organic mass, black, spongy, pulsing slightly. I could have sworn it moved, just a twitch. My heart kicked up. I radioed Dana, told her to come back. She didn't answer. I called again. Nothing. I followed her trail through the corridor into what used to be the crew's quarters. That's when my video feeds started cutting in and out. Static lines. I could still hear my own breathing, but everything else was fading. The corridor was lined with open doors, leading into crew cabins. I checked each one. All empty. But each room had scratches on the inside of the door. Deep gouges in the steel and fingernail marks on the walls. One room had a mirror smashed into the floor and what looked like dried blood smeared across it. Symbols had been drawn, crude overlapping spirals and lines that didn't look like anything I'd seen before. Then I found Dana. Her body floated upright in the captain's quarters, helmet off, her face pale and slack, eyes wide open. But the worst part was the expression. She looked like she died in terror. Not panic, sheer, primal horror. Her mouth was stretched open like she'd screamed so hard it locked that way. I called it in, told the surface to winch us up. They couldn't reach my signal clearly, only fragments. Static interference grew worse as I made my way back. I started hearing clicks, rapid, rhythmic. Not from the ship, but from the water. Not like sonar, more like a pattern. Then I heard her voice. Dana. She whispered my name in my headset, but she was dead. I'd seen her body. The voice kept repeating, Alan, come back. I tried to shut off the audio feed, but it wouldn't stop. Her voice grew distorted, wrong. It echoed in places it shouldn't, bouncing back from inside the hull, but also from behind me. I turned, scanning the black. Nothing. Then I saw something. Just for a second, illuminated by my floodlight, a shape at the edge of visibility. Humanoid, long limbs moving in a slow, unnatural way. No fins, no mask, just pale, stretched skin and empty sockets where eyes should have been. I kicked away, nearly lost control. My oxygen readout spiked. My heart was slamming into my chest. But I made it back to the opening. The figure didn't follow. It just floated there, like it was watching. Back on the ship, I was pulled up half-conscious. I couldn't speak properly for nearly an hour. My skin was ice cold, and I swore I could still hear clicking sounds inside my ears. Ruiz ordered the ROV down again to retrieve Dana's body. When it reached the captain's quarters, she wasn't there. They scanned the entire wreck. No sign of her. No heat signatures. But in the footage, just before the feed cut out again, a shadow moved across the floor, too fast and too sharp to be the ROV's own shadow. Something down there wasn't just alive, it was waiting. We pulled up anchor and left the site within the hour. The client was furious, said we violated contract, but the insurance company pulled all requests for recovery after reviewing the preliminary data. 3 days later, our engineer, Mateo, was found dead in his bunk. No wounds, no sign of struggle, just cold and pale, with the same locked-open scream Dana had. His ears were bleeding. The onboard medical scanner showed a burst in his cochlea, as if he'd been exposed to intense ultrasonic frequencies, but no one else heard anything that night. That was the last straw. Ruiz cut the mission short and returned to Valparaiso. None of us spoke during the trip back, but the clicking sounds didn't stop. Sometimes they came through the comms, sometimes through the walls. After we docked, I quit. I tried to report what happened. No one believed me. They said deep-sea diving can cause hallucinations, hypoxia, auditory anomalies. But I've been under before, hundreds of times. This was different. A month later, Dana's emergency transponder activated again, 300 miles from where we last saw her. No one went to check. Her body was never recovered. Since then, I've heard stories from other divers, stories of old wrecks where the crew is still aboard, silent and floating, of things seen through murky waters that mimic human shape but move like they were never meant to walk, of clicking voices that speak in patterns you can almost understand. I've never gone back to sea. I moved to Arizona, as far from the ocean as I could, but I still dream about it, about the Mar Azul, sitting alone in the trench, doors open, waiting for someone else to come in. And I see her face, locked in that scream, mouthing something I never want to understand. Last week, I got an email. No sender, no subject, just a video file. It was ROV footage, grainy, flickering, showing a diver entering the ship. Then a figure appeared on screen. Not Dana, me, standing inside the wreck, staring directly into the camera. I deleted it, but it's too late. I hear the clicking again, sometimes from the vents, sometimes from the sink. The patterns are getting clearer, and last night my mirror fogged up on its own. 4 words written across it. Alan, come back soon. Story the end.
Story number 8.
We were nearly 2 weeks into the research expedition when things started to go wrong. Not in the usual way, where equipment malfunctions or storms mess up schedules. What we ran into was something else entirely, something that didn't belong in the water or anywhere else humans had business exploring. I was part of a 7-person marine biology team aboard the Mistral Haven, a vessel chartered for deep-sea specimen collection and acoustic mapping. Our mission was to study life near a hydrothermal vent system in the southern Indian Ocean, roughly 400 miles off the coast of the Kerguelen Islands. The team was composed of professionals, oceanographers, biologists, submersible pilots. I handled data analysis and imaging, which meant I spent most of my time interpreting sonar returns and footage from our remote vehicles. The area we were studying wasn't uncharted, but it wasn't familiar ground either. The thermal activity made mapping unreliable, sonar bounced strangely, and even our satellite-based GPS struggled to stay stable. At first, we chalked it up to magnetic interference and focused on the exciting stuff: new species of tube worms, unusual bacterial colonies, rare crustaceans. It was one of those finds that set off a chain of events that none of us could have predicted. 4 days into the descent operations, while scanning a newly discovered vent field, one of our ROVs captured something odd on its forward camera, a formation that didn't look natural. At first, it seemed like just a ledge of dark basalt, but under closer inspection, it had angles, straight lines, patterns, carvings, maybe. It looked like a circular structure partially buried under decades of sediment and microbial growth, the kind of symmetry that doesn't happen without intention. We sent down 2 more ROVs for additional views, and sure enough, the formation was at least 50 feet in diameter, ringed with what looked like stone pillars or supports. Some of them were crumbled, but others were intact. At the center of the ring was a basin or depression, possibly an entrance of some kind. No one could identify the material. It looked like stone, but sonar showed it denser than granite. There were no obvious tool marks, just seamless curves and deeply etched grooves that gave the appearance of writing, but not in any script known to human languages. That night, the mood aboard the Mistral Haven shifted. Even the more skeptical members of the crew couldn't deny that we'd found something out of place. Dr. Annika Weber, the expedition lead, theorized it might be a collapsed ancient geothermal monitoring station, some lost project from a Cold War superpower. But even she seemed unconvinced. Whatever it was, it felt older than anything human. We all agreed to proceed with caution. The next morning, we sent the ROV into the basin. As the ROV descended into the central depression, the onboard lights started to dim, even though the battery levels showed full. Then the video feed went to static. We thought it was a transmission error at first. Deep-sea blackouts weren't uncommon, but the unit's pressure sensors began registering a subtle vibration. A rhythmic pulse like a low-frequency heartbeat. It wasn't natural. No known underwater current or tectonic vibration matched the signature. Then the ROV's arms moved. We hadn't issued a command. Its manipulator claws twitched and curled, as though responding to something. Then it rose, unprompted, and hovered in place. The cameras briefly flickered back on, just in time for us to see something move across the screen, something large and slow, gliding along the far side of the chamber. The video was blurry, but we all saw the same thing. A shape that didn't match any marine species. It didn't swim. It floated, dragging long appendages behind it. It had no obvious fins or head. No eyes, but you could tell it was aware. The feed cut again. We tried to recall the ROV, but it didn't respond. Within a few minutes, we lost contact completely. That night, we argued about whether to send down a manned sub to retrieve it. Dr. Weber was against it, but pressure from the funding group onshore, monitoring the entire mission in real time, overrode her. They wanted eyes on that site, and they wanted it fast. So we prepped Gemini 2, our two-person submersible, for a dawn dive. I didn't volunteer. I'd seen enough of the footage, but Anders and Julian, our most experienced pilots, agreed to go. The sub was launched at 0600, and we monitored its descent from the main lab. Everything seemed fine for the first 5,000 meters, then static crept in around 5 to 500. We boosted the signal, reoriented the satellite dish, and managed to clear it up temporarily. Then Anders' voice came through, shaky. "There's movement outside the sub. We're not alone down here." We asked for clarification, but he didn't respond. Julian took over, sounding winded. "There's something circling us. It's not a fish. It's watching. It's knocking." "Knocking?" Weber asked. We all heard it then, picked up by the sub's external mics, a series of distinct, hollow taps. 5 beats, then a pause. 5 again. It repeated like a message. Then Julian whispered something no one understood. He said, "It's like it knows we remember it." After that, the audio degraded into static and high-pitched feedback. The video feed froze on a single image, the sub's floodlights illuminating the circular structure from below. But now the carvings glowed faintly with a pale green hue as if reacting to the presence of the sub. We lost them a minute later. All systems went dead. The command was given to abort the mission and pull the sub up manually, winching it in from the tether line. But when it surfaced, the interior was empty. No Anders, no Julian. Both suits were there, helmets sealed, no damage to the sub. It was as if they'd vanished in mid-dive. The next 48 hours were chaos. A helicopter was dispatched from Reunion Island to evacuate the remaining crew, and the Mistral Haven was instructed to hold position and await further orders. We were told to cease operations and hand over all data. Hard drives were physically removed from our systems by company agents before we were allowed to leave. But I had copied some files, one of the sonar logs, a snippet of the knocking pattern, and the last still frame from the sub's camera. I know I shouldn't have, but I needed to understand, and I couldn't sleep. Even after we got back to land, I couldn't shake it. The knocking, the green glow. Julian's last words. I tried researching other similar patterns in nature, whale song, seismic anomalies, but nothing matched. Then I started hearing the knocking again, in my apartment, through the walls, always 5 beats, then a pause. I assumed it was paranoia, stress, but then neighbors started asking if I had someone living with me, because they heard knocking from my unit even when I was gone. The dreams came next. Not normal dreams. Dark water. pressure on my chest, and always a face, except it wasn't human. It looked ancient. Wrong. It didn't move, just watched. It had no mouth, but I heard the knocking in my skull over and over until I woke up drenched in sweat. I reached out to others from the expedition. Dr. Weber didn't respond. Neither did the engineer Mila. I found out later that 3 of them had died, separate incidents. One in a house fire, one drowned during a dive in Baja, and another in a car crash, all within 2 months. I'm the only one left, as far as I know. I've since changed names, moved cities, cut off contact with everyone I knew from that project. But the knocking follows me. I've tried recording it, but the audio always corrupts. Devices die, lights flicker. I don't know what we found down there. I don't think it was ever meant to be discovered. Maybe it's not even from Earth, or maybe it is, but it's older than our understanding of time. All I know is, whatever it is, it knows I saw it, and it's waiting. Not rushing, just waiting, like it has all the time in the world. And now I think it's starting to remember me too. Story the end.
Story number 9.
I had never really believed in the supernatural, not in the way people talk about ghosts or haunted houses, but I've spent most of my adult life on the water, and there are things that happen in the deep sea that don't have explanations. Some call it pressure, isolation, or tricks of the mind, but I've come to believe there's more to it than that. In 2014, I was contracted by a private marine salvage company out of Spain. They had a commission from a museum conglomerate to retrieve artifacts from a wreck believed to be an old World War II hospital ship that had gone down off the coast of Mauritania. Not a well-known one. It was supposed to be German, according to their researchers, but it wasn't on any Allied database. No name, no survivor accounts, just rumors and a few sonar blips that showed something deep, over 4,000 meters down. I joined the job as a submersible operator. I've done dozens of deep recovery dives, worked with ROVs, manned subs, you name it. The crew was solid. 6 of us total, 2 other divers, a marine archaeologist named Julia, her assistant Alun, and the project lead, a Norwegian named Kjeld. Kjeld was ex-Navy and didn't talk much, but he knew how to run a clean operation. We left Nuadibu on a converted trawler outfitted for deep-sea recovery. It wasn't anything fancy. No luxury cabins, just metal walls, hum of generators, and equipment stacked floor to ceiling. After a 2-day journey west, we dropped anchor over the coordinates. Kjeld had run the sonar scans, and what we saw was strange. The wreck was intact, too intact. It looked as if it had settled gently into the silt, upright, almost level. The deck structure was undamaged. That's not normal. Hospital ships weren't usually attacked, and this one didn't look torpedoed or shelled. The hull wasn't breached. It looked like it had just sunk, like it was laid to rest on purpose. The first ROV dive returned clear visuals. The nameplate had been stripped off the stern. The decks were pristine. No barnacles, no heavy corrosion. For a ship supposedly sunk over 70 years ago, it looked like it had been underwater for a decade at most. Inside, it was even stranger. Stretchers were still bolted to the walls. Instruments floated in the darkness, tethered to tables. No signs of bodies, but everything felt frozen in time, like a movie set. I remember Alan saying, "It looks like they just stepped out." The first manned dive was Kjeld and me. We took down the pressurized sub with the claw arm, hoping to breach the main ward and collect some smaller equipment or personal effects. We got in fine. The doors had to be cut open with precision torches, but everything inside was undisturbed. That's when I started feeling it. I can't explain it well. It wasn't fear, not at first. It was more like the sensation of being watched. A heavy, pressing awareness, like walking into a room after an argument. But there was no movement. The only sound was the occasional groan of metal and the crackle of our radio feed. Then the lights inside the wreck flickered. Not our sublights, the ship's lights. They came on, dim, yellowish, and inconsistent, but they lit up the hallway ahead of us. I remember saying, "Did you see that?" into the radio, and Kjeld muttering, "It's a malfunction, reflection from our own beams." But I knew it wasn't. I saw the fluorescence hum to life, dust and rust trailing off like snow. We collected a couple items, a clipboard with waterlogged documents, a small surgical tray with rusted tools, and what looked like a leather-bound journal. Then we ascended. Back on deck, Julia and Alan began examining the finds. The journal was mostly unreadable, the pages fused and blackened with age. but Alan spent hours trying to peel apart the legible entries. That night, I was woken by a loud metal bang from the cargo hold. I climbed down with a flashlight. It wasn't rats or shifting gear. Something had moved one of the crates, dragged, not dropped. Deep scrape marks in the floor showed the path. No one admitted to touching it. By the third day, the dive logs were showing anomalies, phantom sounds in the audio feed, bursts of static at regular intervals, and what looked like voices under the background noise. Julia became convinced the ship had sunk under suspicious circumstances. "This wasn't sabotage or weather," she told me. "It's like it just went dark one day. There's no sign of panic. No lifeboats missing. No distress signals logged. It's like everyone on board decided to stay." Then Alan disappeared. He was last seen around 3 a.m. near the lab. His bunk was untouched, his boots gone. We searched every inch of the vessel, even considered he may have gone overboard. But there was no sign, no splash heard, no footprints. What we did find was the journal on his desk. The pages had changed. Some were smeared with symbols, drawn or pressed into the paper, too uniform to be random. Circular symbols, intertwined with crude sketches of human figures bound to tables. That day, Julia said she was hearing someone walking above her cabin every night. Heavy steps, slow pacing. The deck above was the radio room, which no one had entered in days. Keld tried to keep us focused. "We're pulling out by the end of the week," he told us. "Get what we can, log it, and leave." The next dive was solo, my last. We were planning to retrieve a large metal cabinet bolted to the medical bay floor. Julia believed it could contain sealed medical records or wartime documentation. I prepped the sub, ran the checklist, and descended alone. Everything was smooth for the first 30 minutes. I reached the wreck, guided the sub inside, and began cutting the cabinet free. As I worked, I kept hearing tapping noises, soft, rhythmic, not mechanical, not pressure-related, like fingernails on the hull. Then the lights came on again. Not faint, like before, bright and steady. They lit up the entire ward. I looked up and saw movement down the corridor. Not a trick of light, not particles. A person, a tall, gaunt figure in what looked like a blood-stained coat, standing still in the hallway, facing away. No bubbles, no helmet, no gear, just a pale neck and gray, wet skin. I froze. My hands slipped off the controls. Then it turned. Its face was wrong. The eyes were bloated and white. The mouth was open, but there was no scream. Just silence. It started walking toward me, slow, deliberate, no floating. Its feet stepped on the floor as if gravity still applied. I panicked, reversed thrusters, backed out, scraping the sub on the doorframe. The figure kept coming. I launched upward, praying the tether wouldn't snap. When I broke the surface, I couldn't breathe. I stumbled out, raving, barely able to explain what I saw. Keld looked at me with blank eyes. Julia just stared. The cabinet I'd cut free had somehow detached during ascent. We never recovered it. Later that night, the radios started picking up transmissions. Not from us, from somewhere else. German, distorted, female voices screaming faintly. A looping sequence that sounded like an old intercom message. I speak a little German. The words kept repeating, "Patienten müssen ruhig bleiben. Hilfe kommt. Patients must remain calm. Help is coming." After that, things unraveled. Keld locked himself in the bridge. Julia wouldn't sleep, just stared at the wreck through binoculars. I started seeing things in the water. Pale faces under the surface, fingers pressed against the glass of the sub even when it wasn't deployed. 2 nights before we were scheduled to leave, Julia walked off the stern. No scream, no hesitation, just stepped into the water and was gone. I didn't try to follow. I don't remember the trip back, just silence. The ship rocked slowly, surrounded by fog that hadn't been there the day before. When we reached port, we didn't speak to anyone. Keld quit the company. I heard he moved inland, far inland. Alun was never found. Neither was Julia. The items we recovered were lost in a storage fire. But I still have one thing, a page from the journal. I took it before we left. I don't know why. The symbols don't make sense, but when I look at them, I dream. I dream I'm walking the hallways of that ship. Alone, but not alone. There are whispers. They're not angry. They're pleading, begging to be remembered. Sometimes I wake up soaked with seawater. My doctor says it's just stress. But last night I heard the tapping again, faint, from the inside of my walls. Story the end.
Story number 10.
I spent almost a decade working offshore, most of it aboard support vessels as a deep-sea ROV operator. The job was part science, part mechanics, and part gut instinct, managing remote-operated vehicles thousands of feet below the ocean's surface. In darkness, so complete the lights from the machines looked like they were shining into a void. I always thought the sea was the last true unknown on Earth. You can map it, probe it, measure its depths, but you'll never really know what's down there. In 2019, I signed a 3-month contract on a vessel called the Herald Solstice, working off the coast of Greenland in the North Atlantic. It was a deep salvage job. The wreck they wanted us to investigate was an uncharted anomaly picked up during a geological survey, something man-made but ancient. Not a plane, not a modern ship. They wouldn't say exactly what it was. The client was a private consortium from Denmark, and everything about the job was cloaked in NDAs and vague instructions. All we were told was to approach with caution and to document everything. The structure was nearly 2,000 meters below sea level, just on the edge of the Greenland continental shelf. That kind of depth meant only the ROV could reach it, so I spent most of my days locked in the control room, guiding the machine with my co-pilot, Anders, watching the screen as we descended into blackness. From the start, there was something off about the dive site. The seabed around it was barren, not unusual, but the sediment was disturbed in unnatural patterns, as if something had been swept away violently. We didn't see any fish, not even the usual pale crustaceans that linger in the cracks of the rocks, just emptiness. On the 4th day of scanning, we found it. The ROV lights passed over a stone wall. Not metal, not coral, not a shipwreck. Stone. Carved. Too symmetrical to be natural. It looked like a structure, like a massive rectangular building, partially buried in silt. The outer layer had engravings like runes, but not any language I'd ever seen. Smooth, almost mathematical patterns etched into every surface. I remember Anders saying it looked like something that should be on land, not buried under 2 kilometers of seawater. The strangest part was the doorway. A perfectly squared opening led into the building's interior. It wasn't collapsed or blocked, just there, open and waiting. The client instructed us to send the ROV inside. Inside was a single corridor, long and narrow, with walls that reflected our lights with a strange oily sheen. It wasn't metal or stone. We couldn't identify the material. The deeper we went, the more static interfered with the ROV's feed. Normally, you'd blame salinity or depth pressure, but this wasn't normal interference. The static had patterns in it, flickering, almost like symbols, and sometimes if you watched long enough, it felt like they were trying to form images, faces, letters, screaming mouths. Anders joked we were going to find Cthulhu at the end of the hall. Then the lights flickered. It wasn't just on the screen. The control room lights on the Herald Solstice dimmed and pulsed in sync with the ROV's feed. The comms buzzed with garbled noise, like dozens of whispers played backward. And then we saw her. The ROV lights passed over a figure at the end of the corridor. Not a statue, at least we didn't think so at first. It was a human form, standing upright, facing away from the camera. Pale skin, no suit, no oxygen tanks, just a figure standing at the bottom of the sea, perfectly still. We froze. There was silence in the control room. Anders leaned toward the monitor and whispered, "Is that?" The figure turned. The feed went black. Every screen on the ship went dead for 5 minutes. When it came back, the ROV was outside the building again, hovering over the silt as if it had been forcibly removed. But the kicker? Its manipulator arms were retracted, and the internal camera was covered in hairline cracks. There was no sign of water pressure breach, no mechanical failure, nothing to explain how the reinforced casing could have been damaged. Anders was quiet after that. He started sleeping in the control room, said he didn't feel safe in the lower decks. One night, I walked past the door and heard him muttering to himself, repeating the same phrase over and over, "She's behind the glass." I asked what he meant, and he just looked through me. I mean that literally. It was like he didn't see me at all. 2 days later, he was gone. The ship-wide alarm triggered at 4:17. His bunk was empty, boots still on the floor. We checked the security cams. He walked out onto the deck in the middle of the night wearing nothing but his undershirt and stepped over the railing into the sea. No hesitation, no struggle, just vanished into the waves. We reviewed the ROV footage again, frame by frame. The figure in the corridor, when she turned, her face was obscured by distortion, like it was being censored. But Anders had zoomed in on a single frame. You could just barely make out eyes, completely white like overexposed film, and a mouth that was open far too wide for a human. After his disappearance, I tried to back out of the contract. I said I was done, that I wouldn't go back down. But the client threatened to withhold payment, blacklist me. The ship's captain said we only had a few more days left. I agreed to run one more dive. This time, we descended with an updated ROV unit, one equipped with higher resolution imaging and EM shielding. It took nearly an hour to reach the site again. The building hadn't changed, but the doorway was different. Something was etched into the top now, new symbols that weren't there before. I swear they looked like letters. My name was one of them. Inside, the corridor had lengthened. That's not possible, but I measured it against our earlier logs. The interior was now nearly twice as long. The walls pulsed faintly with a bluish glow, like bioluminescence. The end of the hall no longer held a figure, but an opening, another doorway leading down into stairs. The deeper we went, the worse the interference became. The audio picked up noises like breathing, not mechanical hisses, but wet, ragged inhaling. Then came the voices, one after another, whispering names. Mine, Anders, my mother's, my first girlfriend, people I hadn't thought about in decades. I tried to pull the ROV back, but the controls locked. It kept descending, moving without input. Then the camera turned toward the wall. There was a face in it, not a reflection, a face in the wall. Pressed against it from inside, like the surface was flexible. A woman's face, pale and stretched, with those same wide, white eyes and a mouth that opened and opened and opened. Then the lights went out again. This time, when they came back, the ROV was gone, completely. No feed, no signal. We hauled the tether back up and found it cleanly severed, like something had sliced through the steel cable with surgical precision. I told the captain we needed to leave immediately. He hesitated, said we were due one more dive, but I saw it in his face. He was scared too. That night, 2 more crew went missing. One from the galley, another from engineering. No signs, no notes. Gone. We sailed back without finishing the job. The client threatened legal action. I didn't care. 2 weeks later, I started having dreams, not normal ones, deep sea dreams. I'd wake up choking on salt water, hear pressure alarms in my ears, feel pressure in my chest like I was still 2,000 meters down. In one dream, I saw Anders. He was floating just beyond a glass window, mouthing the words, "She's in the hull now." I had my house exercised. I saw a psychologist. I tried everything. It didn't stop. Last month, I woke up to find seawater on my bedroom floor. Not a puddle, a pool, 2 inches deep. No leaks, no plumbing issues, just there and cold and full of black silt. I haven't told anyone else this, but sometimes I hear tapping under the floorboards, not like pipes, like fingernails, scraping to get in. I haven't slept for more than 3 hours at a time since Greenland. Sometimes if I close my eyes too long, I hear her voice, calling my name. From below, from below. The end.
Story number 11.
In 2017, I was part of a scientific team working on a deep-sea ecological mapping project off the coast of Japan, about 120 kilometers east of the Oshika Peninsula. We were stationed aboard a small research vessel named the Nami Seeker, which had been repurposed from a retired military ship and outfitted with advanced sonar systems, ROV deployment bays, and living quarters for a crew of 12. We were in the middle of a 6-week expedition aimed at documenting life along a relatively unexplored section of the Japan Trench. My background is in marine ecology, and I was primarily focused on collecting and analyzing samples retrieved by our ROV, Kuro 2. Our initial dives had gone smoothly, harvesting bioluminescent plankton, strange deep water crustaceans, and a type of translucent eel that no one on board had seen before. It was exhilarating work. The deeper we sent Kuro 2, the more alien and fascinating the world became. I'd always believed in the mysteries of the ocean, but I also trusted the science behind what we were doing. The mood among the crew was good for the first 2 weeks. Long shifts, yes, but we were professionals. The weather had been mostly calm, the sea cooperated, but things changed after our 12th dive. We had identified what appeared to be a chasm within the trench that had not been recorded in earlier surveys, a narrow, vertical fissure that dropped another several hundred meters below our expected floor. It was like a wound in the earth, wide enough to allow entry for the ROV, but narrow enough to be missed by lower resolution scans. Captain Tanaka approved the dive. We prepped Kuro 2 with extra tethers and equipped it with enhanced lighting arrays. Everyone was excited. Even Dr. Fushida, our normally serious lead geologist, had an almost childlike energy. The dive began at 0800 hours. The initial descent was typical. Murky darkness, small flashes of bioluminescence, and the eerie crackle of radio communication from the ROV filtered through the ship's control room. I was sitting at the console, monitoring vitals and logging each depth milestone. When we hit 7,900 meters, Kuro 2 reached the edge of the fissure. What we saw didn't match any natural geology I'd seen in my career. The walls of the chasm were not rough rock, but smooth, almost polished-looking surfaces. Some parts were geometrically aligned, with rectangular impressions like ancient bricks or tiles, coated in sediment and strange, fibrous sea growth. I remember staring at the screen thinking, this is not erosion. This was built. The ROV's sonar began to fail about 120 meters into the descent through the fissure. We lost depth readings intermittently, and its lights began to flicker. Still, it kept descending. When it reached what we estimated to be about 8,150 meters, the main camera feed showed what looked like a corridor, or at least a long, straight tunnel. The walls curved ever so slightly inward. Along them were rows of what I can only describe as carvings, symbols, shapes. They weren't Japanese, not Chinese, not any script I knew of, and something about them made my skin crawl. Then the static began, not digital interference, actual sound. It came through the ROV's audio feed, rising in volume slowly, steadily, a whispering hum layered with clicking tones. It didn't sound natural, and it wasn't mechanical either. I turned to Dr. Fushida. He looked pale. His hands were shaking slightly, clenched at his sides. Suddenly, the lights on Kuro 2 went out completely. For about 4 seconds, we saw nothing but black. Then the lights returned, but the tunnel was gone. Instead, we were looking at a smooth, undisturbed seafloor. No corridor, no fissure, no carvings. It was like we had never been inside anything. I pulled the feed history to replay what we had seen, but it was corrupted. The video stuttered, looped strange frames, and then cut to static. I checked the onboard memory card. It was blank. Kuro 2 started its ascent. We hadn't commanded it. The system said no one had activated the return command. Yet it climbed steadily, like it had received a signal. Captain Tanaka decided to terminate the dive entirely. That night, none of us slept. Not really. Some of the crew gathered in the galley. Others locked themselves in their bunks. I tried to journal what I'd seen, but my hands trembled too badly to write. By the next day, things got worse. Kuro 2 returned to the surface. It was intact, but its claw arm was missing. There were scratches, deep, wide gouges on its undercarriage, as if something had dragged claws or tools across it. We found a piece of something stuck between the frame and the body. It was calcified, yellowish-gray, almost like bone. When our technician tried to bag it for analysis, it crumbled in his hand and turned to dust. From that point on, the crew became different. We were still going through the motions, logging weather patterns, reviewing footage, but people became distant, detached. Fushida barely spoke. Our communications officer, Yuda, spent hours listening to static on the ship's radio, swearing he could hear voices. Then people started sleepwalking. The first was Hiroshi, the ship's cook. I found him standing barefoot on the deck at 3 a.m., staring out into the black ocean, eyes wide open, unblinking. I asked what he was doing, and he said, "They're rising." I asked who. He didn't answer. He didn't remember any of it the next morning. The next was Fushida. We found him in the storage bay, whispering something in a language we couldn't identify, writing the same spiral symbol we'd seen in the trench over and over in chalk on the walls. When we tried to stop him, he screamed, an unearthly sound, primal and terrified. We sedated him. The captain considered aborting the mission, but the weather had turned. A storm system had formed over the mainland, and satellite comms were spotty. We were stuck. 3 days later, our sonar picked up something enormous on the trench floor, larger than any whale, any known deep-sea creature. It had no clear outline, just a shifting mass, like a shadow shaped by currents. It hovered for an hour. Then it began to move toward us. Kuro 2 was lowered again, this time as a defensive measure. We needed to know what was coming. But 200 meters below the surface, it stopped responding. We retrieved it again, and this time the main camera was shattered. Not cracked, shattered as if something had struck it directly. That night, the dreams began. I saw something vast beneath me, a shape that filled the water around it like a mountain rising from the dark. Its surface pulsed, opened, and I saw inside. Eyes, thousands of them. Not all shaped the same, not all facing the same direction. I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe, but I could hear it. A voice, a calling, not with words, just intent. When I woke up, there was salt water in my mouth, my pillow soaked, my feet wet. The next morning, Fushida was gone. We searched the ship, top to bottom, his bunk empty, his shoes still by the bed. The main door to the deck was unlocked, swinging in the wind. Captain Tanaka ordered a final emergency distress call. This time, the satellite picked it up. A patrol vessel from the Maritime Self-Defense Force was dispatched, but we were 36 hours out from pickup. We sealed the doors, we stuck together, we waited. At 2:13 a.m., the lights went out. Not just inside, the ocean lights too, everything. Then, slowly, the ship began to tilt, just slightly. A listing sensation, like something was pushing against us from underneath. One of the scientists screamed. Another passed out. I held onto the wall and looked out the port window. Beneath the water, just beyond the range of light, something moved. A long, flowing shape, like tendrils or chains, rose and wrapped briefly around the side of the vessel. Then they vanished, and a single hollow knocking sound echoed from beneath the hull. Boom, 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 boom. It continued for minutes. When the lights came back, the ship was stable. Nothing was damaged, nothing was visible, but we knew. We all knew. Something had found us. By the time the rescue vessel arrived, 3 more people had vanished. No trace. No sign of departure. Just gone. I left the sea after that. Haven't been back on open water since. The organization labeled the event as psychological breakdown, citing isolation and stress. They disbanded the crew, destroyed the data, told the press that our research was inconclusive. But I remember what I saw, a structure that wasn't natural, a voice that wasn't human, and an intelligence that watches from the bottom of the sea, patient and ancient. I still dream of the fissure, of the corridor, of the eyes. And every few months, I wake to the taste of salt water and the echo of knocking. Story the end.
Story number 12.
We were halfway through our month-long research trip when it happened. The Tempest was an aging research vessel built in the late 80s and repurposed for deep-sea research after the original crew had retired. My team of 6 scientists, including myself, had embarked on this particular mission with hopes of gaining new insights into the uncharted waters of the Mariana Trench. Our goal was to study the migration patterns of a certain species of deep-sea squid that had been discovered in the region 2 years prior. But that goal quickly changed when we encountered something far beyond our comprehension. On the night of the 17th, we set out on what would be the deepest dive yet. The plan was simple. Take our remotely operated vehicle, Siren, to depths of over 11,000 meters to document anything of interest. At that depth, the water pressure was extreme, and the creatures that called it home were unlike anything you could imagine. Our ROV was equipped with high-definition cameras, lights, and sample collection tools. Our mission was routine. It was the kind of work we'd been trained to do for years, but something felt off. It was an oppressive quietness in the air, a feeling that lingered like a cloud over the crew. We didn't talk about it, of course. We were professionals, trained to ignore superstition and concentrate on the task at hand. But I couldn't shake the sense of unease. Even as I sat at the ROV control station, watching the live feed as Siren descended into the black abyss of the trench, something felt wrong. The first 2 hours of the dive went smoothly. The water around us was an inky black, and the only light came from the small, powerful spotlights on Siren. As we descended past 6,000 meters, I started to notice odd shapes flitting in and out of the light, too faint and quick to identify. There were no signs of large animals, no whales, no giant squid, just the occasional flicker of bioluminescence, possibly from small fish or other deep-sea creatures. At 9,000 meters, we encountered a series of strange formations along the ocean floor, towering columns that looked as though they had been crafted, not formed naturally. They rose from the ground like long, ancient stone spires. Their surfaces were etched with deep grooves, patterns that seemed too uniform to be the result of natural erosion. My heart skipped a beat. We had crossed into unknown territory. I knew there were no recorded geological structures like this in the region, but we pressed on, determined to uncover the secrets of the trench. At 10,500 meters, things began to change. We were getting a lot of interference on the sonar, strange flickering patterns that didn't make sense. It wasn't just regular interference from the surrounding environment. It felt like something was actively blocking the signals, preventing us from getting a clear reading. I could hear the low hum of the equipment through my headset, the beeping of the sonar pulses echoing in my ear. Could be some kind of anomaly, I muttered, more to myself than to the others. Some kind of natural interference. But as the ROV descended further, even the cameras began to distort. The picture became grainy and fuzzy. I had to adjust the contrast and brightness several times to make out anything clearly. And then, just as I thought it couldn't get any worse, the feed went black. Shit, I said, frustrated. I quickly tried to reboot the system, but there was no response. The ROV wasn't responding at all. We were in total darkness, 10,800 meters below the surface. I could feel the panic starting to rise in my chest. We couldn't afford to lose Siren now, not after all this time, not after we'd gotten so close. I keyed in the emergency override, trying to reset the system, but there was nothing. No lights, no communication, just eerie silence. Try to get a hold of it again, anything you can do, Captain Lee instructed me, his voice tight with tension. I nodded, my hands shaking slightly as I worked the controls. After a few moments, the lights flickered back on, but the camera feed was still distorted. And then there was something else. A shadow. It was massive, an enormous shape moving slowly in the distance, just outside the reach of Siren's lights. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, or perhaps a malfunction, but the more I focused, the clearer it became. It was too large to be anything I had seen before. A long, undulating form like a massive serpent, or perhaps a colossal squid, its body stretching beyond the edge of our light. I immediately initiated the upward command, desperate to get away from whatever it was, but the vehicle didn't respond. We were stuck, drifting downward. "Captain, something's wrong," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "We're not moving. I can't get the ROV back up." The shadow in the distance was growing larger, closer. Whatever it was heading directly toward us. Then came the noise, a low, guttural hum. It wasn't coming from our equipment. It wasn't even the usual hum of deep-sea creatures. It was something deeper, something ancient, vibrating through the water like the sound of some long-dormant creature awakening. My blood ran cold. The shadow was right on us now, hovering just outside the lights of Siren. I could see its shape more clearly now, its elongated form, its dark, mottled skin. But there was something wrong about it. Something that shouldn't have been there. The creature had no recognizable eyes. Instead, there were patches of dark, gaping holes scattered across its body, as though something had long ago carved them out. Its mouth, if it could even be called that, was a wide, jagged slit lined with hundreds of needle-like teeth, some missing, others twisted at odd angles. And through its open mouth, I could see something else, something moving, like shapes writhing inside of it. It was then that I realized it wasn't just the creature that we had encountered. It was the thing that had been blocking our sonar signals, distorting the feed. It wasn't a creature of this world, at least not one that belonged to the living. I could hear the others behind me, trying to contact me through the radio, their voices growing more frantic. "What's happening? Are you all right?" Captain Lee's voice cracked through the static, but before I could respond, the creature moved. It lunged forward with terrifying speed, and I felt the entire ROV shudder as if something massive had collided with it. The lights flickered and went out again, the vehicle spinning uncontrollably. I frantically tried to regain control, but it was no use. The creature was dragging us down, deeper, faster than I thought possible. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The ROV was still. The shadow was gone. The hum had stopped. The lights flickered back on, and I saw something that made my heart drop into my stomach. The trench floor was different now. Where before there had been nothing but the barren, rocky seabed, now there were massive, broken structures scattered around us. What looked like ancient ruins with walls made of some kind of smooth, polished material. The same carvings, the same geometric patterns we had seen earlier were etched into the walls. Only now they seemed to pulse as though alive. I didn't know what to make of it. My mind raced, trying to comprehend what we were seeing. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get worse, a figure appeared in the distance. At first, I thought it was another shadow, but then I saw it clearly. It was humanoid in shape, towering and gaunt, its skin a pale, translucent blue, its eyes hollow, staring directly at the camera. It raised its arm, pointing toward us. I froze. The figure didn't move for several long seconds, its gaze unwavering. And then, as if in response to some unspoken command, the ROV began to ascend, slowly at first, then faster, as though something above us had taken hold of it. I don't remember how long it took for us to return to the surface, but when we finally did, the entire crew was waiting on deck, their faces drawn with worry. They didn't need to ask what had happened. We all knew. We recovered the ROV, but it had been damaged. The camera was shattered, and the recording equipment had been fried. The only thing that remained intact was a single piece of footage, just a few seconds before the power failed. It showed the figure, its hollow eyes staring into the camera, its arm raised. We returned to port the next day. I haven't spoken about what happened to anyone outside the crew, but I can't forget the face, the eyes. I don't know what we encountered down there, Todd, but I know one thing for sure. It was something that should never have been disturbed, and whatever it was, it's still out there, waiting in the depths. Story the end.
Story number 13.
We had just finished a major salvage operation off the coast of New Zealand when the call came in. The vessel was called Eagle's Pride, a massive luxury yacht that had sunk almost a decade earlier under mysterious circumstances. The captain and crew of the yacht were never recovered, and it had been lost to the ocean for years. It wasn't the type of job we typically took on. Most of our work involved deep-sea mining operations, oil rigs, or treasure recovery. But this one caught the interest of the insurance company. They wanted us to retrieve a particular piece of equipment from the sunken yacht's main hold. Apparently, there was some valuable electronics on board, something that needed to be recovered. The payout was too high to turn down, and after a quick discussion, we decided to go for it. The crew consisted of myself, Jared, the dive technician, along with my longtime colleagues, Dr. Oliver Grant, an expert in marine archaeology, Nate, the lead ROV operator, and Alex, our ship's captain. We were all experienced, having worked together on numerous deep-sea recoveries, but there was something about this operation that set me on edge from the beginning. We left the port in Auckland on a crisp, clear morning, the kind of day where the sun sparkles on the ocean's surface and the air is fresh with salt. I tried not to think too much about the Eagle's Pride. The wreck had a reputation. They said the ship had been cursed. The crew had reported strange noises the night before it sank, screams, thumps, and the sound of something dragging across the deck. The vessel went down without a distress signal, and since its sinking, there were stories. They said the waters around the wreck were haunted. I told myself it was nonsense, just superstitions. We were professionals. We knew how to handle ourselves at depth, and we had the best equipment money could buy. But that nagging feeling in the back of my mind wouldn't go away. When we arrived at the site, I could feel the tension in the air. The ocean was unusually still. The Eagle's Pride had sunk nearly 2 miles down, deep in the waters off the coast of the South Island. Nate and I had already prepped the submersible, but the second we began the descent, I noticed something odd. The water was colder than usual. Even in the depths, the temperature had dropped too fast, too sharply. It felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest as the submersible sank further into the abyss. It's hard to explain, but the water felt thick, like something was holding it together, not just the usual deep-sea pressure. We reached the wreck around 4 p.m. after a long, tense descent. Nate's ROV lit up the wreck's outline on the sonar screen, and a dark mass of twisted steel sitting on the seafloor like some kind of forgotten titan. As we approached, I couldn't help but feel a chill running down my spine. It looked almost unnatural, the way the yacht had settled into the bottom of the trench, as though it had been pulled there. The exterior of the ship was covered in silt and sea life, the once pristine white hull now almost unrecognizable. The portholes were all dark and empty, and the grandiose deck had long been eroded. There were no visible signs of the damage, No signs of trauma that would explain the sinking, no signs of any struggle, just an abandoned shell of a once beautiful vessel sitting eerily still on the ocean floor. Nate deployed the ROV to inspect the wreck's interior. We needed to confirm the location of the equipment. As the ROV descended further into the ship, the footage we received was grainy and unclear. The cameras flickered constantly, making it difficult to see anything with full clarity. Nate was struggling to get a solid visual, but eventually he reported back that the equipment was somewhere near the ship's control room. We agreed to dive and retrieve it manually. As we geared up for the dive, I could feel my hands shaking. I'd been diving for years, but there was something about this wreck that felt different. Something wrong. The water around us was so cold now that it felt almost unbearable. The pressure was getting worse, but it was more than that. The deeper we went, the harder it became to shake the feeling that we were being watched. I descended first, my suit heavy with the weight of the equipment. The ocean enveloped me, a cold and oppressive force that pressed in on all sides. The wreck loomed ahead of me, its twisted metal skeleton stretching out like the ribs of some ancient beast. My flashlight swept across the hull as I neared the opening that led into the ship's lower levels. The opening was narrow, barely wide enough to fit my body through, but I squeezed through it, the cold water rushing over me like a thick fog. Inside, the air was stale, as expected. The ship's interior was a maze of collapsed walls and debris. Broken furniture floated around me in eerie silence. There were no sounds of life, no fish, no sea creatures, just the faint creaking of the ship's frame as it settled deeper into the ocean floor. I reached the control room where the equipment was supposed to be, and that's when I felt it. A faint vibration in the water, like the hum of machinery coming to life. I looked around, trying to find the source, but there was nothing except the wreck itself. The vibration grew stronger, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. It felt like something was alive inside the ship. I moved deeper into the control room. That's when I saw it. There was something in the corner, hidden in the shadows. At first I thought it was a piece of machinery, but as I approached, I realized it wasn't metal at all. It was a figure, hunched over, sitting motionless. It was wearing clothes, tattered and torn, but its face was obscured by shadow. I froze. My flashlight flickered, casting brief moments of light across the figure's face. When the light hit, I could see its eyes, wide, unblinking, black as tar. They seemed to glow in the dark, like they were watching me, and I felt a sharp chill run through my spine. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I tried to move, to swim away, but my body wouldn't obey. I couldn't take my eyes off the thing in the corner. Then, it moved. It was slow, deliberate, like it was dragging itself across the floor with unnatural ease. I backed away, struggling to regain control of my body, but the water was thick, as though something was holding me in place. The thing in the corner began to crawl toward me, its limbs jerking at strange angles. I saw its face, half decayed, with sunken cheeks and hollow eyes, but it wasn't dead. It was moving, alive in a way that shouldn't have been possible. I was terrified. I swam back toward the opening, my heart racing, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The thing followed me, its limbs bending at impossible angles, dragging itself behind me. It moved faster now, and I could hear the scraping of its body against the ship's floor, getting closer, closer. I didn't dare look back. I swam as fast as I could, kicking furiously, but the cold water, the crushing pressure, the thing chasing me. It felt like I was moving through molasses. I made it back to the opening of the wreck and reached up to grab the tether line, pulling myself up toward safety. As I emerged from the wreck, gasping for air, I looked down into the dark water below. For a moment, I thought I saw it. A figure, floating just beneath the surface, watching me with those black eyes. I was pulled back up into the submersible, shaken, my hands trembling as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. Nate and the others were waiting for me on board the ship, but when I looked at them, I saw something strange in their eyes. They looked different. They looked like they had seen something too. I never went back down to that wreck. The equipment was never recovered. We called off the mission, and the Eagle's Pride remains there, buried under the ocean's dark veil. We never spoke of what happened that day. Not once. The stories about the yacht, about the crew that vanished, about the thing that waits in the depths, those stories are true. Something down there is waiting, something that should never have been disturbed. I don't know what it was. I don't want to know. I only know that sometimes when I close my eyes at night, I can still feel it watching from the depths. Story the end.